Hello and welcome to IR Thinker, where we explore the world of international relations one critical issue at a time. I'm Martin Zubko. In this episode, we'll talk about Georgia's energy security at the crossroads of geopolitics, its unique geography, transit role, and domestic vulnerabilities. From Soviet legacies to today's strategic choices, we ask what it takes for Georgia to balance great power pressures while building a future-ready energy system. My expert today is Professor Margvelashvili. Hello?
Hello.
Professor Murman Margvelashvili is a Georgian energy policy expert with more than 30 years of experience in energy sector. His broad interests include energy security, sustainability, and geopolitics of energy transition. As a Director of Energy Studies at the World Experience for Georgia, Associate Professor at Ilia State University, and Director of the Energy and Sustainability Institute, he has helped shape key national energy strategies. Notably, he played a key role in shaping the National Energy Policy, the National Energy and Climate Plan, as well as conceptualizing the National Hydrogen Strategy. He continues as a country expert for the EU for Energy program under the International Energy Agency and consults widely across Georgia and Central Asia, advancing renewable energy efficiency and regional energy security initiatives. I will include all the links in the YouTube description. Let's start with the first and basic question. How Georgia changed when we compare the Soviet Union and present times regarding its energy mix?
Thank you for inviting to our conversation, first of all, and I welcome the audience. So, regarding Georgia's energy mix, it was a pretty drastic roller coaster changes over the period of independence. At the end of Soviet period, Georgia was consuming something like 16 terawatt hours of electricity. Gas consumption was much less than we have now. So we have not approached yet the level of electricity consumption that we had at that time, for obvious reasons, because the structure of economy has drastically changed. And also the abundant energy supply from Russia in terms of heavy oil for power plants has been terminated since then. So Georgia's energy mix now is something like 40-45% of natural gas, which is coming from different sources, mostly from Azerbaijan, but most recently we are increasingly consuming Russian gas. We have about 27-28% of energy coming in the form of oil products. This is mostly diesel and benzene. Coming from different sources, notably from increased amounts from Russia in recent years as well. And the rest of it is our domestic hydropower that produces electricity. So about 80% of our electricity is produced from hydropower. The rest of it is produced through the natural gas from different sources. And basically, that's it. And the remaining percentage of biomass, fuel wood, which still remains, it was pretty our savior during the hardships of the initial independence period. And its share was something like 15-17% in the total energy mix. But now it has gone down to 5%, something like that. So compared to unsustainable, industrialized Soviet periods, we are more now into a more natural and appropriate for Georgia's current conditions state in energy sector.
And when we take those energy sources and we add a layer of dependency or geopolitical risk vulnerabilities, how would you evaluate them?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, we are at the crossroads of many energy flows. One is from Russia to the south. It is natural gas mostly coming for Armenia and part remaining for Georgia. Also, natural gas coming over southern gas corridor from Azerbaijan and down to Europe. Also, we are receiving natural gas from Azerbaijan directly for Georgia's needs through the different contract arrangement than from southern gas corridors. Oil products are very much diversified, so it causes less of dependency because you can switch from one side to another relatively easily. In terms of gas, that's pipeline gas is more, you know, difficult to change from one direction, but still there is this possibility to receive gas from two sources at least, Russia and Azerbaijan. And technically you could switch, not completely by all means, from one source to another, but a reliability factor and risk reduction factor in this case is that we are at the crossroads of transit flows. Therefore, physical termination of gas supply to Georgia would cause a termination of supply to Armenia, for instance, if we are talking about Russia. And from Azerbaijan, it would terminate gas supply to Türkiye and to Europe. Therefore, some kind of assurance that this is relatively safe, at least not alarmingly unsafe, we have in that regard because of these transit arrangements. So it's not directly one-on-one relation, but there are three-parted relations on or four-parted relations on the other side. So there is some increasing dependence also on electricity supply, because in winter period we have hydropower which is depleted in the middle of the winter. So we need in the conditions of increased electricity consumption, we need to import. So there are periods we are dependent on Russian supply or Azerbaijani supply. So, and again, it is probably not critical in a way that it should affect political preferences or decisions. We had a very interesting story in 2006 when we were fully dependent on Russia in terms of gas and electricity. And in the middle of the winter, Russia blew up the pipeline and transmission line in order to change Georgia's political preferences. But that didn't work. On the opposite, we got angry, we got mobilized, and sometime later, in 1 year, we switched completely to Azerbaijani gas supply. So there are two things. There are threats and there are also resilience factors that should be taken into account.
Exactly. And you mentioned that a significant portion of electricity comes from hydropowers. And we see that many countries, they have the power plant owned by foreigner companies. How is this in Georgia?
Basically, most of our medium-sized hydropower plants are owned by a Czech company, and a couple of medium-sized power plants are owned by Russian Interrao US. The biggest power plant, which is Anguri 1300 megawatt power plant, is owned by the government, but it is partly situated in Abkhazia region, where the control of the government does not extend, but still it is operated under the Georgian power system. So this ownership is more or less diversified, and there is a big number of small developers who are building hydropower plants. There is a big number of memorandums and permits issued by the government on the development of small hydropower plants to by private developers.
In introduction, I said that you help to shape the hydrogen strategy for Georgia. How is this? Because here in the European Union, we have mixed voices coming regarding the hydrogen. There is a strategic camp that promotes hydrogen as a future energy pillar for energy security, and also there is another camp that's saying that it's unrealistic due to the physics.
Due to the physics, it is possible. Everything is dependent on economy, basically, finally, because how much you want to spend. Once we developed this, initially it was a concept that we were developing of hydrogen strategy for Georgia to understand what the priorities and preferences might be. So we were at the period of hydrogen hype when international everybody was talking about the hydrogen. Most probable market was European Union. It was the European Union had developed a hydrogen strategy. Germany had also its hydrogen strategy developed, and so everybody was looking, including not only South Caucasus but Central Asian countries, to produce and sell hydrogen to Europe. Not necessarily becoming green themselves. Many countries wanted to continue consuming like fossil fuels while selling hydrogen to European Union for good money. So that optimism probably is not there. It has gone. But to discard this possibility completely, I think it would not be right and appropriate, because inevitably at some point, once the mankind realizes that there is simply no other way but to replace the fossil fuels somehow, then hydrogen surfaces by itself as one of the alternatives, which will still play the role. And you know that European Union has the plans of developing whole backbone of hydrogen pipelines, and at some point in future maybe substitute the natural gas. But inevitably there will be a need for transition period where both gas and hydrogen, potentially in a smaller amount, will be necessary. And the initial expectation that it would be a fast switch probably will not work, and it will take some time. But at this point of time, there is little alternatives that could be competitive. You can use batteries for balancing the renewable wind and solar. Probably the audience may not know why hydrogen is needed, because you have excess of, if you build a lot of wind and solar renewable sources, you will inevitably have excess of energy that you need to utilize. Or you will have, in other times, you will have deficit that you will need to fill. So you need some energy carrier, A, to balance, and B, to transport for long distances to the places where there is no possibility to do a bigger amount of renewable power. So in one way or another, the hydrogen will have its decent role in future's energy system. This is my opinion at this point.
You are witnessing the Georgia's energy transition because you are, as we say, at the core of the topic. Do you see any room for improvements when we speak about renewable energy in Georgia? For instance, when you have solar, wind, hydropower, because We always speak, we want renewables, we want more renewables, but sometimes we reach a limit. For instance, when I speak with Japanese colleagues, they always tell me we have some limits and we can't go further. So, what's your evaluation of the Georgians' renewable energy usage?
Well, actually, Georgia is not yet close to the limit. First of all, in terms of hydropower, we have mountains here, and this gives us the possibility to build reservoir hydropower plants that can be used on the one hand as energy source, on the other hand, they can provide balancing to accumulate and to incorporate into the grid more and more wind and solar. So developing hydropower can be considered as the way of adding more wind and more solar to the energy mix. So we're not there because we are struggling with developing reservoir hydropower plants over all the period of independence. There is kind of a difficulty in developing hydropower plants of big size starting from the initial years of independence. It was Khudoni hydropower plant, which was stopped through the popular protests, which to a great extent people understand it was inspired maybe from outside agents somehow, and that story continues up to now. Bottleneck is in grid integration of those projects. We have not developed the hourly market or balancing market that would be a good mechanism for integration of wind and solar, and also the grid needs to be developed itself in order to be able to incorporate that variable wind and solar power. So it's still a way to go.
I have to ask the question that is now very popular and trendy. What about nuclear energy in Georgia?
Nuclear energy is not basically considered as an option, neither in energy policy nor in discussions with international actors, because maybe for the one reason that we are already sufficiently not so carbon intensive, our energy sector. Therefore, climate considerations do not drive us necessarily to nuclear power. And as I was telling, we have the alternatives of developing hydro, wind, and solar. But there is a caveat in this development that I didn't mention, is its seasonality. We have difficulty in summer and winter. In summer, we have excess of hydropower, and if we build more hydropower, we'll have more excess, and then therefore we need a market for that. In winter, we need the places to buy from. So we are kind of naturally an agent or interested stakeholder for regional cooperation, so that we utilize our seasonal resources in a way that we have exchange, and stable exchange can create this possibility. Coming back to nuclear, another factor is that we had, at the end of Soviet Union, we had a nuclear reactor, which was scientific nuclear reactor in Tskheta. Therefore, we were considered kind of a nuclear nation. But that was conserved, it was closed, abolished, and now we don't have that status of being nuclear. So it probably will be some kind of political difficulty as well to introduce nuclear into our country.
To close this chapter of domestic energy security, there is one question left, and that's, we know that Georgia has those territories that are under Russian control. Are those territories connected to Georgia's grid, or is it completely under Russian control regarding the energy?
Well, South Ossetia is a small enclave, actually. It is one gorge, one valley from the mountain. It is supplied from Russia. Abkhazia is a much bigger region. And I was telling that the biggest hydropower plant, the powerhouse itself, where electricity is produced, it is located on Abkhazian side. So, and it is naturally integrated into the power system. And moreover, it is getting all its most of this energy. It doesn't have gas supply, to my knowledge. So it's all energy supply is coming from Enguri hydropower plant, and it is integrated into the grid. There is a problem that it is only partly subordinate to control because Abkhazians are taking electricity without much consideration of energy saving or payment, or so therefore it's kind of a black hole in the power system of Georgia, which needs to be regulated. And unfortunately, we haven't seen much activities in that direction, although there is a great potential actually of cooperation of both sides, setting aside all the political considerations so we can find economic opportunities of using that energy that is now being taken by Abkhazian side and basically wasted to a great extent. It can be utilized and used for mutual benefit. So that's a way, a venue for dialogue, which I hope will be used at some point.
I think that this would be great because I think it would sort of like balance the geopolitics a little bit and get some advantages for both sides, and maybe some new projects might appear as well. Let's speak about geopolitical role of Georgia. And Georgia has not only interesting neighbors but also interesting powers that that are counting with Georgia as a player, as a geopolitical leverage. So I would like to go through these countries: Azerbaijan, Turkey, Russia, European Union, and China. And we might say a few words to each. What would you think is geopolitical interest in energy? And maybe we can evaluate some impact, like what can you see, what sort of geopolitical movements in energy security you can observe based on your research. So let's start with Azerbaijan.
Okay, so before we go to Azerbaijan, I think we need to review a little bit the Georgia situation right now. Because once you are considering the country and its geopolitics and external relation and energy diplomacy, so you are considering it as actor which pursues its own interests and tries to achieve some goals that are clarified for internally at least. So unfortunately, we are in a transition period now which questions those assumptions that I was just mentioning right now in a way that we, until recently, until two years from now, basically until start of the Russia's invasion in Ukraine, Georgia was very, how to say, persistently and consistently going towards European Union integration. We became the candidates of European Union membership. We were pursuing, relatively independent policy. And that has changed drastically in recent 2 years because we are shifting now to authoritarian rule, which is also demonstrating pretty strong signals of being subject to external influence. So there is a lot of signs of Russian leverage and Russian influence over Georgian policymaking, internal and external. Therefore, the assumption that now Georgia is pursuing independent energy policy, that assumption needs to be, very carefully considered and checked. Um, Talking about other countries and their interests. Well, Azerbaijan's major interest, which started in the beginning of the century, it was Azerbaijan has developed its vast sources of energy, of oil and natural gas, and most of this oil and natural gas is transported through Georgia through Baku Tbilisi Ceyhan oil pipeline, which can transport something like 60 million tons of oil, but relatively it's not that fully loaded. Baku Supsa oil pipeline, also smaller, 7 million tons throughput, and notably Southern Gas Corridor, which supplies Georgia, Türkiye, and the European Union with natural gas. Azerbaijan is conducting a very strong and active energy diplomacy. It has agreements with most, Balkan, Eastern European countries on gas supply. So it is very much looking at further development of its gas reserves because there is a shortage of investment and therefore the possibility of supply does not really fully match all those agreements. That's my personal understanding of the situation. So Azerbaijan would like to develop its reserves further and extend supply over Georgia in that direction. Another is, strategic interest and cooperation with the European Union and European Union's interest towards Central Asia, and necessarily because of that, Georgia and Azerbaijan. There was an agreement between Azerbaijan and the European Union on doubling of gas supply to European Union, and it should have happened. It should have happened by 2027, but it's not very realistic to my understanding, because of the lack of investment and because of lack of commitments from European buyers, actually. And so Azerbaijan is very much looking towards Georgia and through over Georgia to European Union. A big interest is in developing Azerbaijan's offshore wind power and exporting renewable electricity. And then that's over Georgia, going over the Black Sea. There is a widely discussed Black Sea submarine cable project, which is being developed jointly by Hungary, Romania, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan has pretty strong interests in exporting its renewable energy, developing its offshore wind and exporting the renewable energy over Georgia. That's basically one interest. Other many interests like transportation, middle corridor, cargo flows, railway that should and Georgian ports. So there is a pretty strong interest from Azerbaijan because the western direction necessarily goes over Georgia. There is a new opportunity now with resolving the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict. So there is this discussion of Zangezur corridor development, which can be an alternative connection to Turkey and further to the west. But Georgia's direction, I think, preserves its importance in the way that it is a direct connection to European Union that can happen there. Regarding China, I don't think it has direct energy interests in Georgia. It is mostly probably extension of its political presence, its extension of economic interests, this Belt and Road Initiative, which one route can go also from Georgia. We have mostly Chinese contractors working on road development, for instance, with not very high quality, I would say. And also, the Chinese company has won the tender for development of Anatolian deep sea port. But a general tendency, if you look at Georgia's history, is that we have not been very successful in developing big strategic projects. One reason might be is that it is not in interest in our interesting neighborhood, as you mentioned. Some countries may not be very much interested in developing strategic projects and strategic independence of Georgia, and we have not overcome that obstacle, basically. Therefore, this development of Anaglia port, it is also kind of going very slowly, although the award has been, the contract has been, but the contract is not signed itself yet. So that's on China's side. So who else we have here? Right, Russia. Russia's interest is, it's not. It's much wider than only energy interests. Okay, we have a presence of Russian energy company in Tbilisi. Like distribution network is owned by Interrao, of Russian state energy company, and two hydropower plants. But that is not used too much as a political leverage. You know that energy by Russia mostly is, to my understanding, used as a way of infiltration, as a way of corruption, as a way of, establishing influences, soft power, that finally leads to policy influence. That was true in Germany, for instance. As far as you probably remember, what the Chancellor of Germany has become a leader of Nord Stream company, right? So the similar mechanisms probably are working in Georgia, maybe in Armenia, in other countries where Russia has this presence in energy sector. So who else do we have?
I mean, there are more, but I have two follow-up questions to this.
Okay.
When you said that European Union is counting with more gas from Azerbaijan and Azerbaijan would like to sell more gas, does it mean that Azerbaijan will need to build a new pipeline or the current one is sufficient? Because this was the question I was asked when I was lecturing in St. Andrew, and that was very interesting questions from students.
Well, actually, initially, the pipeline project, which is now Southern Gas Corridor, it had several stages. So initially, it was transporting something like 8 billion cubic meters, then it extended by to 16. Recently, it was extended to 23, but it has capacity with adding of pumping stations and maybe in some places adding some additional pipelines to extend beyond 30. But that requires two conditions. One, you need to have gas yourself to put into the pipeline, and also you need investment in the pipeline itself. To implement that, then you need some commitment on the buying side. But the problem with the European Union's indecision is that European Union at some point has, announced this net zero ambition and so on. So the gas development of gas infrastructure was basically blocked. Issuing purchase agreements for the gas was not very easy. Therefore, this investment doesn't flow to the infrastructure or to the upstream or to the midstream, and the development is not there. But the potential of extending the pipeline is obviously there, and it can be extended to add 10 more BCM.
And the second follow-up question is about Armenia. We know that Armenia is also going through many dynamic changes. And how is that energy cooperation with Armenia affecting sort of position of Georgia?
Armenia, we have two connections basically. One is gas that I was telling, though we are transit country for Armenia to receive gas, and that is not basically related to much political realities because we do not, Georgia does not involve itself in gas throughput all this transit pipeline. So we have agreements with Gazprom, which are not open, so I cannot tell the details, but we are getting our own portion and we're purchasing gas on our side, but and also agreement on transit. So whatever gas goes there, Georgia gets some fee from that. So otherwise, there is no political component in that relation. Another connection was Armenia electricity connection. The point is that Armenian power grid is synchronized with Iran, while our power grid is synchronized with Azerbaijan and both with Russia. So we have weak connection between our power systems, and there is a long discussed project of establishing a direct current connection between Armenian and Georgian power system. Georgia has done its part, but Armenia is reluctant in finalizing and doing its own part. So the electricity connection is basically very weak. The rest of it is probably, relatively straightforward transit of oil products. But Armenia is getting most of it from Iran anyway, so that's
Right.
yeah, it's not a big deal.
What do you think about the role of the United States? Is there any interest to develop Georgia's electricity or energy position, or not that much?
Well, I wish I could confirm the interest of United States in our region and in Georgia, but I don't have much evidence of that, unfortunately. Once in end of 20th century, 90s and early 2000s, America was very strongly present in South Caucasus, and it was the main enabler of Azeri resources development, main enabler of transit pipelines development, and it was the main political sponsor of those projects, which we cannot say anything close to it now. So the major presence of United States in energy sector, it was support through US aid, which, as you know, has been closed by Trump's orders. So now the role of United States, I think, is pretty much diminished, and I cannot comment on any obvious interest that has been demonstrated by United States in energy sector in our countries, except some statements of and not very coordinated and not very harmonized statements by different officials at different times. So it does not lead to a consistent policy evidence, honestly.
And how do you see the position of Turkey? Because we know Turkey is deepening cooperation with Azerbaijan. They basically saying that's our brothers. And we know that Azerbaijan and Turkey, they have many interests, many mutual interests in energy. So is there any impact on Georgia?
Well, obviously there is an impact, and that can be, could be, much more beneficial impacts as well. For instance, the Turkey's interests are not only with Azerbaijan, but it extends much further to Central Asia. President Erdogan was trying actively to bring Turkmenistan's natural gas. You probably know that Turkmenistan is one of the biggest has one of the biggest reserves in the world of natural gas, and its European Union or Turkey itself are very much willing to get that natural gas but it requires building a Caspian pipeline, and it requires further extensions. So if Turkey were successful in reaching towards Caspian reserves of Turkmenistan, for instance, so that would necessitate transit over Georgia, which would be obviously beneficial for Georgia in terms of political stability and in terms of economic income as well. And we have pretty good relations with Turkey in terms of energy because Turkey is also a good market for our hydropower plant. I was telling that hydropower is very seasonal. We have periods of excess and periods of deficit. So in excess periods, most of our developers are looking towards Turkey as a potential market, which has worked pretty well over the recent periods, and the prices 2 years from now were extremely high, so that it finally justified transit from Azerbaijan of a big amount of electricity, export from our hydropower plants. So that relation is in electricity sector is very beneficial, but there is a potential of improvement as well because the export capacity and Turkish network is pretty much limited. So it can be extended so that it would enable much wider regional cooperation in electricity sector. In gas sector, as I was telling, would pretty much welcome seeing more gas flows coming. And if Turkey, which has the ambition of becoming a gas hub in the region so that it will supply European Union and other consumers, mostly European Union, so that if that realizes that it will necessitate increased transit over Georgia as well. But again, we are coming to this new possibility of Zangezur corridor. So how this interest will be divided between these two possibilities over Georgia and over Armenia, and how much realistic it will be after all. So that needs to be seen.
Absolutely. I think that's also very interesting research topic in the future, maybe pipeline through that territory that's tempting to research for me as well. I want to ask you, is there something that is maybe hidden? Maybe there is something that might be discovered later, or something based on your research that you might say that Georgia has a potential in this, but due to many factors, due to many implications, basically it's not used.
Well, in terms of fossil fuels, Georgia is not very rich. All the attempts to develop new resources have not led to any decisive discoveries yet. There was a possibility to explore on the Black Sea shelf, which has not also produced decisive results up to now. One possibility that I'm thinking of is developing of reservoir hydropower plant. Because of climate change, we still need to regulate water flows and to preserve water for droughts, for potable drinking water, for irrigation, and so on. But very important is the possibility of regulating the big amounts of renewable wind and solar. So Georgia has the potential of becoming a regional balancing center. So where, for instance, we could balance the variable electricity coming from Azerbaijan's wind resources, or we could balance the solar power that would be coming from maybe from Armenia and so on. So that is the potential that strategically should be developed, as I understand, because there are multiple benefits of developing the reservoir hydropower plants. People do not have this possibility, and they are trying to develop pump storages. But we have the luxury of having these rivers that will also produce electricity and will be also a potential for balancing of the variable renewable sources. So that is more or less what is on the surface. But maybe there are some other treasures underground as well. I don't know. We need to think about it.
Definitely. When we consider the geopolitical position of Georgia, as you mentioned, it's a country having transits. And with the transits, there is a fee for the transit. And the next question is, do you see that money coming from the transit being reinvested into infrastructure, into modernization, upgrades, or do you think that this is area that needs a bit more improvements?
Well, that's a very painful question actually for me because we have advocated for healthy tariff policy for a long time. Very unfortunately, the income from the transit of the gas, for instance, is used for subsidization of tariffs. So basically, it is wasted, honestly speaking, if you are talking of in economic terms. So, and that's a result of populist politics that we couldn't get rid of, over all this period of independence. So we have been strongly advocating against it, but up to now, that thing continues. So I hope that with this experience of these years and also with some hardship in the because it has led to deteriorated financial condition of the state companies who are recipients of that transit fee. Okay, so there is some consideration already of making more healthy economic decisions, and that would be a very good thing to do.
Is there any very, very critical area that needs investment because of the age of the
Absolutely,
infrastructure?
absolutely. Initially, once we signed the agreement, it was in 2002 about this gas and oil transit. So it envisioned also that it was discussed at that time two projects. One was a refinery project in Poti that would use the oil coming from the abundance of oil in Georgia, that it was transit, but still we had it going through the country and we could start producing oil products. And another strategic project is gas storage, because the gas that is flowing through southern gas corridor, and we are getting the option of buying gas from that, it is more or less steady over the year. Once we have strong imbalance in consumption between summer and winter. In winter, we consume 4 or 5 times more gas than in summer. So that balancing and also security storage should be built as an underground gas storage. So that improper disposal of financial incomes of the oil and gas company, state company, that has led to the impossibility of developing of those projects. People are telling that the gas storage is not also technically feasible, which needs to be checked more closely, honestly.
We have gas storage in the European Union and it works pretty well. So
Sure.
maybe, like the...
That is what has saved over the years of after Russian invasion in Ukraine.
And also Japan. Japan has a great policy for the reserve of the energy. So I think that
Well,
might be...
that is a normal practice. Armenia also has its own reserve. Azerbaijan probably doesn't need that much, but some balancing can be done anyway. So that's a normal practice that you accumulate gas and then use it in the winter. Why? Because the long distance pipelines do not have the capacity to supply all, or they should not be built to the full capacity of consumption if you can store and then consume afterwards, because it's additional expense.
Let's speak a little bit about the next chapter, and that's the supply shocks. Do you see any danger, any maybe areas worth of mentioning that it's important for Georgia? And as a researcher, have you ever experienced, except that what you already mentioned, sort of like minor blackouts in Georgia or some situation that you needed help even from abroad?
Well, actually, there is always the possibility, and there are always the risk of technical malfunction or natural disasters and so on. For instance, we had a natural disaster when there was a ice, well, it was not a landslide, but ice slide from the glacier that broke the gas transmission line. We have two gas lines coming from pipes coming from Russia, and one of them was ruptured fully, and also it flooded two hydropower plants. So that was a natural disaster, and we had difficulty in that period. Another, there was a period, it was, I think, in 2012, when in Azerbaijan, in Shah Deniz, there was some technical problems. So, and we were unable to get the gas from there. So it was also creating problems. So country should be prepared for those things. One of the benefits of European integration that we need to mention, and it is that it helps to think through those things, because those you have already a template of European template how you should address the security risks of gas supply. Therefore, we have emergency plans in electricity network, emergency plans in gas network. Those address short-term disruptions. But if you are talking about availability, long-term availability of gas in future and so on, that is about energy planning, energy diplomacy, so that you have proper agreement already in place. In that sense, we do not have much activity additional, honestly speaking, and capacity as well, because the problem is we are not so much policy makers in energy sector as we are policy takers. So we are dependent on the decisions of big players, including Russia, including Turkey, including Azerbaijan, and the investment in Azerbaijan by other players. So those things more or less define the landscape for Georgia, which we cannot plan and strongly affect.
At the beginning, we also mentioned that you cooperated on the national strategy regarding energy. And
Mhm.
we know that there is something on the paper and there is something in reality. So, to what extent is this energy strategy fulfilled? Or perhaps you see some issues that are worth of mentioning.
Okay, on energy strategy, we had a pretty interesting experience. It was, we were not, obviously, we were putting together the documents, discussing them, but the major experience was bringing different stakeholders, bringing different state agencies, and helping them to cooperate on strategic thinking and development. We were successful to some extent. Obviously, there is much more room for improvement there. And the document was creating through these consultations. I have to say that it was a cover document for EU document, National Energy and Climate Plan. So basically, this strategy, as you call it, is called National Energy Policy. So it is a cover document for National Energy and Climate Plan, okay, which was submitted to European Union, to Energy Community, and it was one of the components of compliance with European Energy Acquis. Um, Following that document is a challenge in two ways. One is the projections; they are always, uncertain. Situation is very dynamically changing, and so on and so on. And second, I would say that involvement of top-level policymakers was not that strong. So that is a common challenge probably in many different places, including our region, including Central Asia, and so on, that top-level policymakers are taking their own decisions on the necessity of the current moment. And it is a part of a bigger problem that governments normally have short-sighted interests in energy sector. Energy is a long-term undertaking. While governments are elected every 4 years, so their average time span of interest is 2 years, basically. So most of the decisions are taken on shorter period of time in the interest, and that's another reason why there is a discrepancy between the written documents and actual policies.
As academics, we always like taking critical lens when we are scrutinizing many issues. What about when we speak about the energy governance failures in Georgia? Do you have any example, maybe experience based on your research? And we don't want to go deeply into that, but we want to have sort of example to learn from.
So after Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, this is the second saddest story probably, and for understandable reasons. So energy sector is very much prone to malign influences and to corruption. It is a concentration of huge amounts of money and very big political interests in the circle of a small number of people. So, and also those people can be approachable by other external actors easily. And unless you have very strong safeguards, very strong transparency, very strong guidelines and openness of decision making and mutual control of different branches of the government, so you have a high probability of being subject to corruption, being subject to external influences, being subject to, improper activities. So this is another probably most important benefit of European. This is why we were so much promoting the accession to European Union, because it introduces instruments of transparency and accountability. So in that direction, we have, pretty poor experience, because most, let's say, agreements with SOCAR, with Azerbaijan, are not public. Although this is not that much commercial actor, it is kind of government actor on the one side and the other side. So there should be a mechanism of transparency there. So this is why we don't know what conditions have been agreed there. The same is with several agreements with Russian companies. There are questions about the transit. By the way, our current acting government has started investigation of corruption in the energy sector. I wish it is serious and it achieves the result, and it doesn't stop at just blaming some personalities, but goes in understanding the systemic problems in that thing. There is a instance, for instance, I was talking about transit of Azeri electricity, or sometimes Russian electricity, Turkey. So the transit tariffs were negotiated by the company itself, the transmission company, and they were almost negligible, so that the state was losing a lot of money on that transit. So why that happened? Now the government is they are telling if they are investigating that. Another instance is allocating sites and memorandums for hydropower or renewable energy development. So we have issued the previous ministry has issued the memorandums for 11,000 megawatts of generating power once whole Georgia's power system is below 5. So, and that had also signs of corruption that is also under investigation now. And in general, it is a good practice to keep the energy sector governance under control. And European legislation should help in that way. But also it requires pretty well informed and knowledgeable civil sector, because there is a problem, because energy sector is a crossroads of technical, environmental, economic, political, all those issues, and you need pretty well educated and knowledgeable people in order to control how it works. And another problem is independence of regulator. Regulator is established in a way that it should be independent of the government. But if regulator falls under political influence and you have one ruling party who governs everything, then you do not have this check and balance system anymore. So that opens the way for improper decisions as well. So there are many lessons to be learned in this.
The last question for today's interview. Based on your research, and when we have Georgia's energy security and international relations, which area should be researched more? Or maybe you have a tip for researchers for some under-researched topic, issue that might be of interest of our viewers.
Energy security itself, it can be considered as a more academic topic now, but I do not think that the concept of energy security is researched and established in a sufficiently understandable, clear, and simple terms. Once we are talking about Georgia's energy security, we are dependent on import of electricity, dependent on import of gas, but we are also dependent on export of electricity and so on and so on. So how to calculate some kind of parameters in order to guide the actual real political decisions, that is one challenge, and this is what we are now trying to look at closer. And I think that that's not only true for Georgia, because there are more than 100 different definitions of energy security. Every country at every point of time, they defined it a different way. There is a need basically on academic side to have more rigorous kind of research and some definitive results on that direction that would also be practical. That is one way that we need to develop. Another is I would very much be interested in developing the concept of regional energy cooperation now, since this conflict with Armenia has been more or less resolved. At some period, we were parts of unified South Caucasus power system, all these three countries. So what kind of synergies can be explored and utilized now after this history of independence? So that is another interesting topic. And still one other, as I was telling, the hydrogen and connections to Central Asia. I hope that Georgia will establish itself not as a policy taker and policy taker of Russia. It will return its perceived reputation of independent corridor. And if that happens, then we will open the ways for transits between Central Asia and Europe. We have not talked about the project of Black Sea cable, I just mentioned briefly, that has the possibility of transferring sufficient big amounts of renewable electricity. But there is several studies undergoing right now. One, Azerbaijan is studying much bigger project of exporting electricity through a cable. It can go through Turkey, it can go through Georgia. Central Asia and Azerbaijan, they are exploring now the possibility of laying the cable under Caspian Sea to export green energy from Central Asia. And Central Asia has practically unlimited potential of renewable energy. It's kind of Saudi Arabia of renewable energy because of its abundant territories and pretty good potential of solar and wind. So exploring that strategic and hyper-strategic possibility of exporting that energy, that would be also a very interesting topic for exploration.
Professor Margvelashvili, many thanks for your time, for sharing your research thoughts and insights with us. As I said, Georgia is, and I think will be, always a very interesting geopolitical element, energy security element, and energy geopolitics element in the world. So I hope that this episode also encourages people to research Georgia's energy security and international relations much more. So thanks again for being on IO Thinker.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.